Hello, folks, and welcome back to the Culture Books podcast. My name is John. I'm joined by
Sheridan.
It is the 3rd of March, 2025. We are doing a read-along podcast of Ian M. Banks's culture novels. This is episode 27 of Use of Weapons, in which we will tackle chapter 1. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. For the culture fans who've been following along, the Ian Banks estate has launched its new website. So to distinguish the property from the books which Hachette owns the rights to. So they've got their own website now, ianbanks.co.uk. And who is the only podcast that they endorse for people wanting to get into reading Ian Banks, Sheridan?
I don't know.
It's us!
That's pretty cool.
It is. So
I was even telling people at work about it. They were like, wow, you're cool. But before I was just like a dork.
So big thank you to Adele Banks for giving us, because literary estates to recognise fan-made art it's a pretty rare thing. So we're
very appreciative.
We appreciate it enormously, and we will try to.
It's very motivating. I might start reading faster.
It's what everyone's been waiting for, Sheridan. So that's exciting. And then the day after that, it was announced that Amazon is back developing Consider Phlebas for adaptation, and really interesting group of writers and producers attached. Charlie Yu, I think his name is, who wrote Interior Chinatown.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
That's a great show.
And
if anyone hasn't.
Chloe Zhao, who's a big special effects producer. So, with Adele Banks' experience running indie film festivals, she was always going to want something edgy in that regard, I think. And I think it's looking good, but obviously we'll see if it ever sees light of day, because the problems with the owner of Amazon and fully automated luxury gay space communism remains. So
Amazon have produced some pretty substantial sci-fi properties, though.
Mm-hmm. The Expanse and Fallout being probably the examples of them getting it right. Although The Expanse, they picked up the second half of when the Sci-Fi Channel cancelled, so they already had the cast and the crew.
Well, not sci-fi, Lord of the Rings, although obviously that's a...
Rings of Power is controversial. The Tolkien fans loathe it. But then there's people like me who are just like really happy to see Middle-earth on the screen. So, yeah.
But yes, all very exciting for culture.
Yes. Now let's get back to the regular format of the podcast, because it was actually funny. I messaged my brother saying Sheridan's a few pages away from finding out about the chair, and he's like, "Oh, this is so exciting!" And then I mentioned it to you, and you're like, "I know all about the chair," and we're like,
"Well," then I was "Oh, that's right, yeah," because there's a bit in the beginning of the chapter about the chair.
Yeah.
But then I came up and I was like, "We need to do the podcast because I found out about the chair."
Anyway, let's not spoil it too far. So what do we do first, Sheridan?
We have 30 seconds for you to recap the book thus far.
Well, in particular, I'm going to recap how the timeline has led us here. Correct. So count me in.
3, 2, 1.
So this timeline, the book has 2 timelines. One goes forward, one goes back. We're in the going backwards timeline. The last time we encountered Sheridan in Zakalwe going backwards, he was fleeing the aftermath of a war and some sort of horrific family scandal. And and then he wanted to kill himself because he was feeling so upset about the whole business, and something intervened. And now we find out where we're going with that.
I feel, so for listeners, John is watching the clock countdown, but I don't have the benefit of the countdown.
I will hold it where you can see it, shall I?
I'd rather not, actually.
Okay, all right. So you're going to complain.
I like the rogueness of...
You want to complain but not to address the issue.
Correct,
okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, and on that note, Sheridan is now going to attempt to recapitulate, I would say, the most infamous chapter in science fiction, which is saying something. So, Sheridan, your time starts in 3, 2, 1.
Zakalwe's deep in the war. He's kind of winning, but he's also frustrated with his generals and all this sort of thing, and he gets a little bit annoyed with them and chucks one off a car. Well, not chucks off a car, but lets one out of the car and drives away. And then he goes to Alethiomal's headquarters, and his sister's there, and they start having a chat, and she's annoyed at him, and then the chair arrives.
Keep going.
Then the chair arrives.
Yep.
And it's the bones of his sister, who he thinks is hostage on the main ship. But she's dead.
Okay.
Who makes a chair out of something? Not just like, is there, am I wrong? Can we just talk about the chair now?
Sure. We're going to come back to it, but get it off your chest.
But is there an implication that the tanned skin seat cover
Yes.
contains a bit of her pubes?
Yes, that's the implication.
It's so, like, just when you like... So when I was I found out about the chair while listening to the audiobook out in my garden, and I literally collapsed over the back of the chair to steady myself when I found out that the chair was Darkens's bones.
And skin.
And skin. And that's what I mean, that it just keeps getting worse.
Now, as an aside, I got DeepSeek's new generative AI to do the cover image for this episode. And the outline of the chair that it made, just today, Charles Stross, the Scottish author, who I'm a big fan of, tweeted that Ella Thiomel's been decorating the Oval Office because in that infamous Trump-Zelensky media conference, there was a chair that it was a wooden chair. You can tell it's dark wood. It's not made out of bone, but the shape of that chair was actually the same as the AI generated for this one. So it was. Anyway, so that it's all Banks all the time in the news.
Yeah, wow.
Is there anything else you want to say about?
We can talk about the chair a bit when the context of the chapter.
We're going to get to that.
Now that we're all over the shock of the chair.
Yes. Yeah. I just want to briefly bring up. So they go back to Zakalwe's headquarters, and then it's casually mentioned that it had been Ella Thiomel had used it as a headquarters earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're right. You are right about that.
Anyway, let's start with the classic Banksian cold open here. No lights burned on the Stabarende. It sat squat against the grey leachings of the false dawn, its dim silhouette a piled cone which only hinted at the concentric loops and lines of its decks and guns. Some effect of the marsh mist between him and the ziggurat of the ship made it look as though its black shape was not attached to the land at all, but floated over it, poised like some threatening dark cloud.
Fun fact, it's pronounced Stabarend.
Okay.
Because I listened to the audiobook.
Yeah. I kind of like it more with the E pronounced, but anyway.
The guy who does the audiobooks,
Peter Kenny.
He was working hard in this chapter.
Right, to do all the voices.
Yes, he did a really good job.
Did he do Liv Ueda? Oh, yeah, he must have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he put on a falsetto for that?
Not really.
Okay.
It's not too much. But
I
there's a
mean,
lot of emotion in there.
Well, as we said, it might be the most infamous chapter in science fiction. So possibly.
If people were walking past our townhouse, seeing me in our front courtyard, they would have been like, "Wow, that woman! Is she okay?"
Yeah.
I was like, collapsed over, half bent over, mouth open, like, "Oh my god!"
When you read the next chapter, I'll ask you which one was more impactful because they're
it gets worse.
They're two corkers, yeah. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so that opening gives we all through the book we've been flirting with the Stabarend. It's been sort of looming in and out of the mists of Zakalwe's mind, and this is when we finally find out what it is and where it is and how it fits in, and I'm sure this was part of an inspiration for this. So the Japanese super battleship Yamato, which was Star Blazers, that science fiction, very early anime where to save the Earth in the future. The Japanese rise the Yamato up from the bottom of the sea, and it goes and blasts away the aliens, right? Its final mission was intended to run it aground so the Americans couldn't sink it to defend, I think, Okinawa. So this idea of grounding your battleship to make it an unsinkable fortress is very much rooted in World War II.
Cool. I was wondering.
Yeah.
There's a lot of military tactics in this one, actually.
It's a very military chapter, but it also has a lot of human interactions.
Yes. It's really the best of both worlds.
So we're introduced to Zakalwe in this moment as we discover he's a general here.
Yes.
And his almost stepbrother, cousin, Elithiamel's running the other side of the war. We had a sense that that was where they were going in the childhood flashback.
Yeah. I mean, the one, maybe it's just me not picking up on it, and the forwards backwards narrative. But yeah, it wasn't really clear to me that that's what was happening
back then.
That Elithiamel was leading.
Here.
Yeah, and I mean, do we find out more about that in the next? Well, actually, don't tell me.
No, I'm not going to tell you that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you tell me, how did the chapter make you feel about the dynamic between Zakalwe and Elithiamel, the way it's sort of expanded?
Well, clearly something.
I mean,
we already knew that he had the affair with... They were destined to be on
opposite sides of a civil war.
We already knew that he had the affair with the sister.
With Darkins, yeah. We'll get to that because we do have some stuff to address with that, but that's a little further in the text.
So we knew that there was a falling out.
Mm-hmm. But that was more that, remember all the stuff about the soldiers coming to the house and Elithiamel's father being executed. There was trouble in this society brewing, and these two boys at the time seemed destined for...
But I mean, it's got pretty extreme when they're both leading armies.
Yeah, I mean, this is what happens in civil wars, though.
And I mean, clearly the culture's recruited... Because his culture recruited Zakalwe at this point?
No. Remember, the culture doesn't recruit Zakalwe until after he's been on the slow ship.
Okay, yeah.
And then after he gets almost killed on the fighting for a side on the iceberg.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
okay, and then... but there is a sense, and it's not canonical, there's a sense that whatever intervenes to stop him killing himself on the slow ship might have been something from the culture watching over. Yeah. Or it might not, but given that Banks doesn't write anything casually and that there's a whole chapter devoted to that, I like the idea that was actually the culture keeping a mind out. But yeah. Now I'm going to read quite a big chunk of text here. He tried to remember the garden and the smell of flowers, the way he sometimes did whenever the fighting started to seem just too futile and cruel to have any point whatsoever. But for once he could not conjure up that faintly remembered, beguilingly poignant perfume. That's a beautiful little line there, beguilingly poignant perfume. Or recall anything good that had come out of that garden. Instead, he saw again those suntanned hands on his sister's pale hips, the ridiculous little chair they'd chosen for their fornication. Now, I want to use that for a moment because there is considerable debate as to whether the sex between Elithiamel and Darkins was consensual in that chapter where it mentions that. And when it says they chose for their fornication, this seems to indicate that at least Elithiamel was not a rapist, although he's many worse things beyond.
Well, yeah, and also later it says, when they're talking about it, there's a line that says, he knew she didn't love their cousin anymore. That had been something brief and juvenile, something she'd used in her adolescence to get back at the family for some imagined slight, some favouring of Livietta over her, which also implies
they had a consensual relationship.
Yeah.
Although, within the walls of the same household, the parents would not have been fucking thrilled. Excuse my language. I'm just going to keep going from where that line was, and he remembered the last time he had seen the garden, the last time he'd been to the estate, with the tank corps, and he'd seen the chaos and ruin Elithiamel had visited upon the place that had been the cradle for both of them. The great house gutted, the stone boat wrecked, the woods burned, and his last glimpse of the hateful little summer house where he'd found them, as he took his own retaliatory action against the tyranny of memory, the tank rocking beneath him, the already flare-lit clearing whiting out with the bright flame, his ears ringing with a sound that was no sound, and the little house was still there. The shot had gone right through, exploded somewhere in the woods behind, and he'd wanted to weep and scream and tear it all down with his own hands. But then he'd remembered the man who had sat there and thought how he might treat something like this, and so had gathered the strength to laugh at it and ordered the gunner to aim at the top step beneath the little house, and saw it all finally lift and burst into the air. The debris fell around the tank, sprinkling with him earth and wood and ripped bundles of thatch. I do like this bit. He remembered the man who had sat there and thought how he might... So he's saying, what would Elithiamel do in this situation? It's like, Elithiamel will solve the problem. Because if there's one thing Elithiamel is, it seems to be he's quite the problem solver. Or the weapon user, I guess we would say.
I mean, just to be clear though, even though this juvenile adolescent tryst was tryst.
Mm-hmm.
Do you say tryst or tryst?
Mm.
Was, we think, consensual. Like, she is now a hostage unwillingly.
Oh, in the time period of this chapter?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it describes how, he'd had agents watching at the airport when she tried to flee the city when he was capturing it. And,
So, again, I don't know.
Ask the question.
I mean, we don't actually really know what's the fallout between Zakalwe and Elithiamel.
Yeah.
Other than he rooted his sister.
Yeah, and then they ended up on opposite sides of the Civil War.
So there seems like there's going to be more to the story of how they fell out.
I don't think they necessarily fell out, just they ended up on opposite sides.
Well, it feels very personal, this war.
Obviously, it'll feel personal, but the forces that were leading to the war were greater than these two boys. The fact that they came from extremely well-connected noble families is why they ended up leading opposite sides of it. Yeah. So moving on, there's this line here. That was when he had to think of Darkens, trapped on the ship, held captive by Elithiamel. He knew she didn't love their cousin anymore. Oh, sorry, you've already read that bit. Yeah. And then the thing about Livuetta, some favouring of Livuetta over her. It might have seemed like love at the time, but he suspected even she knew it was not now. He believed Darkens was really an unwilling hostage. Many people had been taken by surprise when Elithiamel attacked the city. Just the speed of the advance had trapped half the population, and Darkens had been unlucky to be discovered trying to leave the chaos of the airport. Elithiamel had agents looking out for her. So at this point, Elithiamel's like this demonic force that's almost unstoppable. He's ahead of everyone at every move, isn't he?
Yes. And he seems to be really more in love with Livuetta than...
Well, he's suddenly he keeps saying he's in love with Livuetta, yeah. But also he's just trying to mess with them all the time.
I mean, Livuetta has some sympathy for him. Which later in the chapter when there's that interaction.
Elithiamel's got into Livuetta's head.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she is absolutely making Zakalwe's life a misery. Yeah. No, it's obvious his life is already quite miserable in this situation.
Yeah, because she sort of blames Zakalwe a bit because she says, well, why don't you talk to him? And he's like, well, he won't talk to me. And she's like, I'm not reading from the book, but she says words to the effect of, well, you're not asking the right questions or you're not saying the right things.
Yeah, but the only thing Elithiamel wants is for Zakalwe to surrender. So,
Yes, but that's why it feels like a very personal vendetta.
Oh, I would say Elithiamel is trying to use every lever he can find to prosecute his war, and a big part of that is messing with the Livuetta and Sharadin. So there's a line here I'm interested in. How could Elithiamel do it? Even if he didn't still love her, and the monster claimed that Livuetta was his real desire, how could he use her like another shell stored in the battleship's cavernous magazines? I mean, poor Zakalwe thinks that keeping a hostage is the worst thing Elithamel's going to do. And then ask himself, what was he supposed to do? Surrender? Barter sister for sister? Mount some mad doomed rescue attempt? Simply attack? And then we meet Swales, and I'm going to ask you what you think of Swales. Sir, it was Swales. Sir, perhaps we should be setting off now, back to headquarters. The cloud is breaking from the east, and it will be dawn soon. We shouldn't be caught in range. So, as we haven't quite described this properly yet, so they're in a forward observation position, with blackout curtains, trying to, take a look at this fortress that Elithamel's built out of a battleship and a dry dock.
Mm.
Yeah.
But so, what's an ADC?
Aide de camp.
Is that what Swales is?
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, well, Swales is a staff officer. Staff officers, they're the ones who do all the paperwork and organising. The general says, we're going to march this way, and they say, okay, well, the supply trucks need to go first and second, and they figure out the order of march and how they're going to get everyone fed and watered and fueled. And generally they're junior-ish officers, but they're being considered to be generals themselves. That's why they're attached to staff. So,
sorry, skipping ahead again, but tactically, Elithamel must know that what is preventing Zakalwe from doing a full-blown attack is that Darkens is on the ship, or is so.
No, yeah, go on.
Well, there must be an element that he has her hostage for a reason.
Yes,
which would be as collateral, or as like a bargaining chip.
Yeah.
So why? I mean, the only reason you would deliver the chair, because he delivers the chair in a truck.
Okay, I think we need to talk about this when we get to it. But we will do that. Okay, but let's go through what else, because it's not a bad chapter even up until that moment. But
true, yeah. Yeah, I feel like the chapter does get overtaken by events.
Yes. Now then we get more of Swales when they're in the car. And Swales, says, Sir, I want to talk to you about your plan. And Zakalwe's like, you're going to tell me that we should attack, bomb and shell the Staber end until it's a flaming hulk, and then storm it with troop hovers. He said, holding up one hand, I know what you've been discussing, and I know what decisions you think you've arrived at. They do not interest me. And Zakalwe does have a plan that he needs to wait for the spring tides to bring heavy naval ships up the river, and where they can get the big guns to attack this heavy fortress.
But he is also resist.
He doesn't want to do the attack because he doesn't want Darkens to die.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
But he does also have a plan to attack with overwhelming force rather than something a bit half-assed. And
he does have a plan.
When you're dealing with a very tricky customer like Elithamel appears to be, and you have the overwhelming force, if you can assemble it, the sensible tactic is to actually assemble the overwhelming force rather than attacking it piecemeal and being destroyed in detail.
Yeah, and he does seem willing to sacrifice Darkens, actually. Like, he says that. He says in the conversation with Lipuetta, I have a lot of other things I have to worry about, a lot of other people that could die. Yeah. So he does seem willing to actually sacrifice her.
He does.
For a common good.
At the same time, I mean, poor Swales here is being quite brave and, saying, sir, we think you're making the wrong decision and, we'd like you to reconsider and, make a different decision. And Zakalwe's just had enough. He's exhausted at the end of a long war, and he's seen enough people die, and he doesn't particularly want his sister to be one of them at the end. But he is also concerned about the rest of his men.
I mean, personality-wise, because he's doing all of this without. This is pre-culture. So this is he just has his own intelligence. He doesn't have anything culture-related backing him. I mean, he's a pretty assertive.
And he's got them to the point, and I do like the description of, everyone thought he'd just be a peacetime general and hand the army back onto the next person.
Yeah, like he's
and suddenly he has to fight a civil war, and he's actually won the civil war. He almost won the civil war. He's overcome his incredibly tricksy cousin, and he's on the edge of achieving the victory.
Yeah, he's pretty confident leader.
Yeah,
like he's denying all of his advisors.
Yeah,
and maintaining a course.
But there is the very strong suggestion that Swales is making here, that you're letting your sister force you into a path that isn't the best one.
Yeah.
And there's this line here where it explains his plan. We must wait until the winter floods, when the fleet can negotiate the estuary and the channel and engage the Staberend on equal terms. To send in aircraft or attempt to engage in an artillery duel would be the height of folly. And, and then poor old Swales. You will be silent, Commander Swales, he said icily. The other man swallowed. I have sufficient matters to worry about without having to concern myself with the drivel that passes for serious military planning between my senior officers, or, I might add, with replacing any of those senior officers. So
that's pretty ballsy. Like, he's a baller. Like, that's pretty cool.
Well, he's been commanding an army at war for a while now.
But that kind of personality, which you sort of, I thought, had come from having all the power and knowledge and intel of the culture, that was always there.
Oh, look, we always knew the culture recruited him because he had known military talents. And then poor Swales, still trying to turn the tide here. Sir, if you have any love for any of your commanders, we beseech you, think again. Remove me if you feel you must, sir, for having spoken like this. Court-martial me, demote me, execute me, forbid my name. But, sir, reconsider while there is still time. And what is Swales' reward for this attempt to give frank and fearless advice?
He gets left on the side of the road.
Left on the side of the road, within gunfire range of the,
think about that.
the enemy fortress.
It's a bit mean, really.
It's extremely mean. Yeah, I mean, it's possible there's another car in the motorcade that can pick him up.
That has to be right, though, because that goes against his character.
Oh,
because he is worried. He genuinely has a concern for his men, like he does.
He does, but I mean, Zakalwe locked the door, drive on, he told the driver. They raced away from the dawn and the Staberend before its guns could find and destroy them. So that indicates Swales is plodding along. And then we get a little flashback to give us the context here. They had thought they'd won. In the spring, they'd had more men and more material. In particular, they had more heavy guns. At sea, the Staberend lurked as a threat, but not a presence, famished of the fuel it needed for effective raids against their forces and convoys, almost more of a liability. But then Elithirmel had the great battleship tugged and dredged through the seasonal channels over the ever-changing banks to the empty dry dock, where they'd blasted the extra room and somehow got the ship inside, closed the gates, pumped out the water, pumped in concrete, and so, his advisors suggested, probably some sort of shock-absorbing cushion between the material and the concrete, or the half-metre calibre guns would have shaken the vessel to pieces by now. They suspected Elithirmel had used rubbish, junk, to line the sides of his improvised fortress.
I mean, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. And again, though, when the comparisons to the Japanese Yamato, which was also starved of fuel to render it ineffective, is very strong there. And then we get the context here. He had expected to inherit a perfectly drilled peacetime army, splendid and impressive, and eventually to hand that over to some other young scion of the court in the same creditable condition, so that the traditions of honour and obedience to duty could be continued. Instead, he found himself at the head of an army going to furious war against an enemy he knew was largely made up of his own countrymen, and commanded by a man he had once thought of as a friend, as well as almost a brother. I mean, that does get to the heartbreaking realities of civil war, which, look, I'm sure most people listening have seen the movie Gettysburg, but, these things happen. Although it is worth noting that Robert E. Lee's family... Robert E. Lee's family almost all fought for the Union, and Robert Lee was the only member of his family that actually fought for the Confederacy. But... yeah, that's Whole other side note.
That's a...
Yeah, Sheridan doesn't care.
I do not care about the American Civil War history. I'm going to put that out there. It has nothing to do with my culture. Well, a little bit.
I think it is. Anyway, all right, let's move on. There's a line here. He had tried to stop it, tried to bargain from the beginning, but neither side wanted peace on anything except its own terms, and he had no real political power. And so he had to fight. His success had amazed him, as it had others. Probably not least Elothiamel. But now, poised on the brink of victory, perhaps he just did not know what to do. And then going on a few more paragraphs later. To acknowledge the interest millions of other people had in whatever happened here was to place too great a burden on him. It would be to admit by implication that he was at least partially responsible for the deaths already of hundreds of thousands, even if nobody else could have fought more humanely. Which is the whole thing where lots of people die in wars, and if you're running them, you have to consider that cost.
Well, yeah, and as he gets closer and closer to winning,
you can't blow it.
But also, he's getting closer and closer to potentially having to make the choice of like, do I win or do I kill my sister?
Yeah, and and then it's like, well, but he also doesn't want to add more bodies to the pile if he can avoid it. At which point he's balancing his sister who's a captive and also his sister who's still very much in his face. But also how many of his men are going to die if he makes a purely selfish family-driven decision. And he seems like, as generals go, quite a considered, except for leaving Swales behind. That was a bit of a dick move, but...
It was, actually. That's what I mean. It's a bit out of character.
So then he gets back to the castle, and then we meet Livuetta, and her line, "Been out to gaze upon the beast, have you?" He started, then recognised Livuetta's voice. He saw her by the windows, a dark figure. He relaxed. "Yes," he said. "Close the drapes." So this whole blackout thing that if you've got light shining through a window, the enemy can shoot at that. Yeah. Yeah, and then he turns on the room lights. A bit further on, he says to her, "We can't just all lay down our weapons, Livy, and I don't think anything else would work. He wouldn't pay any attention. You could meet face to face. That might be the way to settle things." And then Livy, the first messenger we sent personally, came back without his skin.
That was very well performed in the audiobook.
There's a bit of a shriek, was there?
It was very good voice acting. I mean, that's pretty brutal. And this is the thing, Elithiamol is horrible.
Yeah.
Like, he's not just, Zakalwe is just like a general fighting a war. Like, he's doing normal war things.
Yeah.
But this guy's a psycho.
Yeah, but this is what the Nazis were good at in terms of getting in the heads of their opponents. And they got the French to surrender in World War II. They came within minutes of scaring the British into surrendering, and then opposition successfully formed mostly because the Americans provided a lot of money. This is what bad people do extremely well is get inside the heads of their opponents and make them feel like opposition is futile, or even that opposition is impossible. And I would argue that current events in America are an example of acting so quickly that it makes opposition unviable. Anyway, let's.
There is a bit here though that implies more, because she says. It says, "She shook her head. What is it between you two?" she asked. "Why won't you talk to each other? How can you forget everything from when we were children?" Yeah. And then he's like, "I haven't forgotten."
Yeah.
So, there has to be more.
What do you mean more what?
Between them that has to be revealed as to why the relationship broke down so hard.
Well, the relationship between the two of them didn't break down. They just ended up on opposite sides. And then...
But then why is he so mean? Like, he's skinning people and making bone chairs out of his sister.
Because he's finding the weapons and using the weapons. And
then we get to the line. Do you want to do the line?
We'll get.
It does happen a bit, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to the line. But the line has been repeated numerous times through this book about what is a weapon.
But now we know.
What are you willing to use as a weapon?
Making a chair out of your dead sister's bones.
Well, killing your sister to make the chair as well. But hopefully she was dead when they started making the chair.
Making a little pube cushion.
I love how that's what you're upset about.
It's just so unbelievably sick, right?
But that was it. That was Ian Banks sitting at his typewriter
and putting a button in the navel. I mean, it's very cool. Because,
it's macabre as hell, but
yeah, it is macabre. But it's very cool storytelling. I will say that. To find that line that is
just that extra detail to
that little extra bit that. It's not even very offensive. It's not an offensive thing when you read it, but the
horror of it resonates.
It's very good writing.
Yeah.
To think of something like that, and it's very cool. Awful, but cool.
Yes. And this exchange between Livuetta and Zakalwe, and when we get to the next chapter, I want you to remember how long this exchange goes on. But anyway, then Livuetta says, maybe you should attack, she said suddenly. Maybe that's the one thing he isn't expecting. He shook his head. He has her in the ship. We'd have to destroy that before we can take the city. He looked her in the eye. Do you trust him not to kill her, even if she isn't killed in the attack? Yes, Livuetta said. Yes, I do. And I really feel for Zakalwe with his... partly I'm like, why have your sister in the camp? Send her. Send her.
I think she does seem to be roaming around in a spot that she's not really needed. Everyone's like, we've got to feed this woman.
She's not adding a lot of value.
She's running around in dark clothes, being a bit moronic.
Yeah, and then I did love this line. You are lonely, and I am lonely, and Darkens is lonely, and he is lonely, and everybody is lonely.
Yeah.
That's...
I think that says a bit more about her, though. She would be very lonely.
Yes.
Because she doesn't have the war.
She doesn't have the aides all running around doing the bidding. Yeah.
And she doesn't have it. She's just there helpless with her sister being
sister
trapped.
Doesn't get killed. Yeah. Moving on, there's this line here I liked. And he admitted to himself he envied Elithiamel. Would that he were more like him, he thought, all too often. To have that ruthless cunning, that extemporizing guile. He wanted that.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. He's just a traditional general.
Yeah, but yeah, put a pin in that.
Because there was that...
He wants to be more like Elithiamel.
There is that line, I don't have it before me, but he's...
Okay.
Oh, yes, I do. Do you think I'm not still the brother you knew as well as the soldier they made me? He's sort of implying, that he's been corrupted by the military in a way.
The military remakes people.
Yeah.
That's what it does.
But he's got nothing on Elithiamel.
But he's been on the winning side, so he hasn't had to get creative.
I don't know if he feels like he's on the winning side when his little dead sister's chair bones
Well,
turn
obviously
up.
not. We're going to get to what happens after that, aren't we? But
all right.
Now the chair's getting closer. He heard a truck draw up outside the window where it was not supposed to. He sat still, suddenly thinking, a massive bomb just out there, and was suddenly terrified. And I love the growing horror here of the sounds in the distance. It's beautifully, something bad is happening, but
I like that bit where he was like, he heard voices. I'm not reading, but he heard voices. Some of them shouting, and some of them trying to keep their voices quiet. That really implies no one knows what the hell is going on.
Yeah, and then there was something like a scream cut off abruptly.
You can just imagine someone putting their hand over her mouth, right, and being like, "You've got to be quiet. This is gonna mess with him so badly."
Now, we've got a real Chekhov's gun here because he's got his pistol waving around. The fact that he's got a sidearm is introduced, extremely well. And also for the purpose of the storytelling, it's introduced as quite a small caliber sidearm, which may or may not be particularly effective, which is going to be important. And then trying to find out what's going on. He saw Livuetta staring wide-eyed back up at him. There were a few other soldiers, one of the other commanders. They stood around a small white chair. And then what do you think of Livuetta trying to get him to go back?
That just seems like a sisterly thing to do. Like, no one wants... She's seen it.
Obviously she's dealing with the enormous trauma.
She's seen the bone pube chair.
Yeah.
And she's like, whatever is in her, she's like, he cannot see this.
Yeah, part of it must know that she can't stop him seeing it or finding it. That's never going to work. Yeah. But she's not thinking rationally in that moment. No one's thinking rationally in a moment like that.
Really, other people should have tried to stop him from going down there.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to read a reasonably big chunk here. He went down, walked around the flagstones to where the silent group of men stood round the little white chair. It was very small. It looked so delicate that an adult might have broken it. It was small and white. And as he took a couple more paces forwards, as the rest of the people and the hall and the castle and the world and the universe disappeared into the darkness and the silence, and he came closer and slowly closer to the chair, he saw that it had been made out of the bones of Darkent's Zakalwe. And then they had tanned her skin and made a little cushion out of it, a tiny plain button in her navel, and at one corner, just the hint, the start of some dark but slightly red-tinged hair.
The one thing that's a little bit unbelievable is how does he know it's her bones? Well, like, they talk about the references to the broken, that she'd broken.
The pelvis had been shattered.
Yeah. But, like, that's a lot. That's a lot to take in.
Yeah, someone's made you a chair made out of bones who's been keeping your sister hostage. You're going to infer a bit as well.
Probably. So, can I go back to what I was going to talk? So, he's delivered the chair, right?
Yep.
So, he knows. Like, this
who's he?
Elithiumol.
Yeah.
He's delivered it in the truck. He's gone.
Well, he sent the truck. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he must know that the only outcome from this is that they're going to attack. Like, why do you do that? Like, he has to be trying to get a reaction.
Yes, and he's hoping that he's planning his breakout. And we're going to get to that. So Elithiomel's forces are breaking out of their containment in this moment.
Is this in the next chapter?
No, it's here. Oh. So anyway, so the point is that Elithiomel is planning his breakout from the siege, and he's going to use whatever trauma is happening in the opposing headquarters at having delivered this chair to paralyze the headquarters.
Where does it say that, though?
We'll get to it. It's here.
I don't understand military tactics,
Sure.
clearly.
We'll get to it. Now, there's this, then you get into Zakalwe's reaction. He tasted blood in his mouth, looked down at his right hand. He seemed to recall having punched Livuetta on the way up the stairs.
Which seems nasty.
Yeah. I think Livuetta I think we can be quite certain Livuetta does forgive him, but we'll get to that. What a terrible thing to do to one's own sister. So he's already got remorse about that. Intending to rub his eyes, he raised one hand and found the pistol in it. He put it to his right temple. And again, this you've got this rising sense of horror that's built in here again. Keep this twice in this chapter, Zakalwe's in a room on his own. And
who would leave him on his own? Like, no one should have left him on his own.
Well, he'd walked off and then closed and locked the door. So, it wasn't like...
Shouldn't have let it happen.
Well, yeah, but everyone's quite shocked and traumatized. Intending to rub his eyes, he raised one hand and found the pistol in it. He put it to his right temple. This was, of course, he realized exactly what Elithema wanted him to do. But then, what chance did one have against such a monster? There was only so much a man could take after all. He smiled at the doors. Somebody was thumping on them, calling out a word that might have been his name. He couldn't remember now. So silly, doing the right thing, the only way out, the honourable exit. What a load of nonsense. Just despair, just the last laugh to have. Opening a mouth through the bone to confront the world direct here. That's such a brutal way to describe blowing your head open. But such consummate skill, such ability, such adaptability, such numbing ruthlessness, such use of weapons when anything could become weapon. And then we get the final line that explains what Eleuthema was up to here, the final paragraph. The besieged forces round the Staberinde broke out within the hour while the surgeons were still fighting for his life. It was a good battle and they nearly won.
Yeah, so sorry, I think I got distracted by the fact that he'd shot himself. And I'm like, how does he shoot himself and survive?
Well, particularly with a smallish handgun, which has been described as being a smallish handgun. And he put it to his temple instead. If you want to do it properly, you put it in your mouth. If you put it in your temple, it's not unheard of for people to survive that. I just want to, this last line, super important. Everyone who's listening needs to know, Sheridan. What do you think they mean when they say it was a good battle and they nearly won?
Well, it must mean that...
Who nearly won?
It has to be Eleuthemel's winning.
Okay. So it's not referring to the surgeons?
But he lives, we know that.
Okay.
I feel like... Well, he lives.
Sure.
That's why we've got a whole book.
Okay. All right. So that's the end of the chapter. Now, who's your favourite character in this chapter?
I mean, it has to be Eleuthemel. I mean, he's not my favourite, but I mean, he's like dark. He is like, I mean, that is shocking.
Yeah.
I do feel that throughout the book, I would have liked more Eleuthemel backstory.
Okay.
But maybe that wouldn't have made what happened so surprising.
I mean, remember, he doesn't actually appear on page in this whole chapter, and yet he's a dominant presence.
Yeah, but he hardly appears in the whole book.
Yeah, there's maybe, a dozen pages.
I had sort of forgotten about him.
Okay.
I was like, oh, yeah, that guy.
Well, we have been reading this book for 2 years now, Sharon.
We need one with less chapters.
Okay, and the Staberind's the only ship in this.
Yeah.
What do you think of the Staberinde, though?
I mean, it's serving a purpose, isn't it?
Okay. At least you had some explanation of why this ship keeps haunting his dreams, I guess.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Mm-hmm. It does seem to have now. Mm-hmm. We understand its importance.
Okay, excellent. What were your other takeaways, I guess, other than the fact you collapsed backwards onto your chair when you...
Actually collapsed forward. Like, oh.
Okay.
I didn't fully, I just sort of half doubled over. Oh.
Right. Okay, so a physical, visceral reaction.
Yeah, I was like, oh!
Yeah. Yeah, which is... I mean, obviously this isn't the only book of Ian Banks's that's famous.
Well, I mean, the Wasp Factory's pretty messed up.
Yeah.
But I felt like that was too much sort of going on with that one. This one, they really just led you down to a moment of just one shocking moment.
I was going to say, I don't actually think this is the most shocking thing in the culture books. I think there's something worse in Accession, but
I'll have to get to that one.
And yeah, anyway, but okay. We've been talking quite a long time here. I know the audience are wanting us to deep dive on this chapter, so thank you for sticking with us, folks. What are your other takeaways from this chapter? I mean, I guess you've been reading a book for 2 years now. How was it as a payoff? Obviously, the book's not finished yet.
Pretty good payoff.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts about Livuetta and how she's feeling about life at the end of this?
I feel sorry for her too.
Yeah? You just feel sorry for her?
Yeah.
You don't think she should be taking any learnings from this?
No, she's a sort of she's a bit of a two-dimensional character, though, right?
You think so?
A little bit.
I mean, do you think she should have been nicer to her brother? No, you had it coming?
Well, I mean, she wasn't not nice to him.
Well, I thought she was breaking his balls.
I thought she was okay.
Just go talk to your nice cousin. He's a lovely guy. It's like he's a monster. He's a demon.
I mean, maybe she wouldn't be saying that now.
What do you think's going to happen in the next chapter?
I have no idea.
Okay. All right then. Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I just
we're
need to
done?
go and get in the fetal position for the trauma I've been through.
All right. Well, folks, thank you so much for listening to us, and we hope we've given you the reactions from Sheridan that you wanted out of this, and we're going to do just the next chapter, which is 14. And then we will do a standalone episode after that of the end bits of the book, which is there's a poem and then there's a what feels like the start of a new book, which never goes anywhere. So that's the plan. So just read chapter 14 for the next episode, and we will be back. Sheridan has discovered new vigor. So who knows? Maybe we'll be back in a week or so. Never know your luck. Certainly, Sheridan, I would say there's a very exciting next chapter to come.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks.
Have a good night.